change is situational. Like from an HR perspective, that change often involves planning, frameworks. It's almost the operational part of how do you like plan for the change. Um, but the more challenging part is the transition, which is the psychological and emotional process of change. And that's where the separation begins. And that's where the challenge also begins of landing a change effectively, whether it's changing your ways of working, whether it's reorganizing, whether it's introducing new terms and conditions from a people perspective. All of these things go through this exact journey. The change is planned and executed, which in some ways is the easier part. The harder part is that transitional part that you have to navigate as a people leader.
Quick one whilst I've got you. I want to talk about Plum, our all-in-one HR platform that unites end-to-end HR from compliance and development to 24-hour therapy and coaching, all using AI as an enabler throughout the entire employee lifecycle. Book in for a free demo at heyplum.com and thank me later. But now, let's get back to the episode. Alan, hello.
Hi, Georgia.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Yes, thank you for having me.
We are going to dig into something that happens quite a lot in business today. It's an inevitable thing that happens. And before we do, I really want our listeners to know more about you. So there's a question that I like to ask every single guest, just sets the scene a little bit.
Yeah.
The question is, was HR part of the plan or did this happen by chance?
It happened by chance.
Tell me more.
Oh, well, I'd completed my undergraduate degree and I kind of got to the end of it and thought, what am I going to do? I had intended to be a teacher. It didn't really work out. And I got a letter randomly from the business school and I had done quite well in my undergraduate. I got a first class honours degree and that bought me like a little bit of currency. And just at that point, I had got some money back from like an insurance policy. So I had some money and I went and decided, do you know what? I'm going to do a master's in HR. I didn't really know anything about HR. However, I then went along, I done an essay and I done an interview and they accepted me onto the course. And that was the beginning of my HR journey. Although almost instantaneously, even on that course, I began to bite off more than I could chew, much like most of us do in HR, because I actually met my ex-partner and we went on to have a child together, from the actual the postgraduate degree that we both done. But yeah, it was never really part of the plan. It just kind of happened all in a matter of months.
And talk to me about the journey from the postgraduate degree to where you are now as the head of people.
It's not been straightforward. It would be the most honest assessment. I actually graduated from my master's degree during the financial crash in sort of 2009. So it was really tough to get on the job ladder at that point. But with perseverance, volunteering my time, and finally landing my first sort of big job with Barclays, it's been such a journey of like learning and growth and going through lots of change and transition. But also I've met some incredible people along the way. I've worked with and for a lot of incredible people as well, which I'm eternally grateful for.
And speaking of change and transition, that is mainly what we're going to focus on for today. And as I said at the start, the only thing that is guaranteed in life is change. And that's the same for business.
Yeah.
Change happens quite a lot. However, as HR professionals, potentially we're not always filled with the tools in our toolkit to know how to manage that period of change. Could you give me a bit of a breakdown of what's the difference between change and transition?
Yeah, I think one thing I'm going to say is I'm standing in the shoulders of giants here because the transition model was created by a guy called William Bridges back, I think it was the 70s or something. And in short, what he was explaining was that there is no new beginning without an ending. And I think that's the best place to begin. Change is situational. Like from an HR perspective, that change often involves planning, frameworks. It's almost the operational part of how do you like plan for the change. But the more challenging part is the transition, which is the psychological and emotional process of change. And that's where the separation begins. And that's where the challenge also begins of landing a change effectively, whether it's changing your ways of working, whether it's reorganizing, whether it's introducing new terms and conditions from a people perspective. All of these things go through this exact journey. The change is planned and executed, which in some ways is the easier part. The harder part is that transitional part that you have to navigate as a people leader.
I completely agree. I also think that transition is the unspoken part of change. A lot of us go straight to the change, but we don't think about the transition. And I would actually say the change is the easy part. The transition is the hard momentum and muscle we've got to flex when we go through that. Why would you say that understanding the transition part is really key for us as HR professionals?
I think because it impacts on so much of like how you approach the project that you're doing. It's each of those phases brings with it nuance. It means that you have to be embodying a particular energy, if we could call it that. So, for example, the ending, so to speak, which is the beginning of the change process, but actually for those who are undergoing the change, there is, like I mentioned, no new beginning without that ending. That ending, from a people perspective, day to day, requires a lot of acceptance and understanding. That's the messy part of change. It's the part where people are letting go of their attachments. So they are emotional, angry, frustrated, sad. All of these, like a cauldron of emotions tend to be bubbling. For example, doing a restructure, a layoff. People are by their nature emotional. As a people professional, you are required to step into that. And it's messy. It's not perfect. It's never clean cut. And it requires a lot of compassion, but you still have to execute. So you have to be direct, but it requires you to be in the energy of containment, to contain whatever emotions are bubbling and being able to like get your arms around that. Because often we're not just leading, say, employees through the change, we're also leading other leaders and managers who in themselves are also going through their own transition, because perhaps it's their own teams. They are, they're letting people go that they've built deep attachments to, that have been pivotal to work that they've done in previous years. And from our perspective, we have to recognize those things. We have to be cognizant of that journey that all leaders are going through too. And this is not about tea and sympathy. This is about like connection, which is a fundamental part of how you build a high performing team, how you build a high performing business. The next part, of course, is that part in the middle. Bridges called it the neutral zone. I call it the place between the worlds. And that's the scary part, where all of a sudden the change has been enacted. Maybe the emotions have been processed. People have begun to let go of the anger, the frustration, the sadness, but like they don't know what's coming next. The new beginning has not been made manifest, but there's no longer anything to hold on to from the past. And that's when, from a people leader perspective, we have to like over communicate. We have to try and provide as much clarity as we can, not certainty, clarity. And in that process, it's like over communicating, like being that person who's like echoing that voice, leading people towards that new beginning. And that's the really challenging part of the transition journey. That's the part where we lose people along the way. People decide that they don't want to be here now. You're not just losing people who, maybe have been selected for redundancy, but you're losing others in the journey as well. So it's super important that we are able to like make sure that we get our voices heard across the business.
I personally really relate to that as well. So I actually went through a huge transition. I went through an acquisition, and I went through that both as an employee, and then when I went through that experience as then an HR professional managing other people who went through an acquisition themselves. And I felt all the emotion. So I can totally relate to when you're saying people can respond differently. I definitely experienced that. I went through such emotions of excitement, like, oh my gosh, there's so many growth opportunities and development opportunities here. But then also fear. How do I fit into this? This is really scary. I've gone from a smaller organization to a much larger organization. Now I need to learn new ways. Am I happy with that? What does that look like? And what happened is they didn't communicate effectively with me. So I actually realized in hindsight that I was overthinking because I'm a very passionate person, when actually the change wasn't as scary. It was a really exciting opportunity, but the piece that they'd missed was that connection.
Yeah.
that you just mentioned. And it is such a shame because 70% of change management efforts fail because of a lack of reassurance to teams and management knowing what's happening, which sits so nicely with what you've just said around transition.
Yeah, of course. The thing about it is what we have to also realise is that ourselves, managers, employees, we tend to think of personalities as just one monolithic block. You have one personality, but you don't. You have multiple parts of yourself. And there's a part of yourself that is going through a change or a transition, and there's a part that is excited about what will come next. But there's also a part that wants to keep you safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that other part, and this is a dance that we all have to do, whether it's in the workplace, in relationships, friendships, choices that we're making about how best to live the life that we want to live. And all these different parts of ourselves are vying for attention, and different little cues and triggers are impacting on that. And from a people perspective, it's being cognizant of all of these things. You have to become, almost like very centered and being able to like look around you and see what energies are in operation in your leadership teams and the change environment with those that are impacted. It's very, very important that you tune in like to the energies that are moving in the space, whatever that might be.
And how can we start to do that?
Well, a lot of how you do that is to begin to do the most important thing. Like you can work really hard on your job, but the thing you should work most hardest on is yourself. And I think that begins in many different ways for different people. I actually think, and I'm going to say this in the nicest way possible, I think that often it's our suffering that brings us to a point of change. It brings us to a place of deep discomfort. I think, in all honesty, for those who are watching and listening, if you can spend a moment to just like reflect, because often we hear suffering, like, oh, that's a bit, but a much. But actually, when you really truly feel in and reflect on all of the challenging things that have happened in your career or in your life, these are often the very things that have taught you the deepest lessons. Now, I also don't want to ride roughshod over anybody's pain or trauma, events that have happened in their lives that can be very difficult to deal with, and it takes many years to heal from. But I also know that these are deep lessons that if we are able to tune in and learn the wisdom from them, that we can carry them forward. And it's like we get the battle scars as people professionals, right? Because we've led the restructures, we've led those projects that went south very quickly, and all of the negative energy and emotion that's pent up inside of that because of the egos involved and the perceptions of how people may be judged. And so we carry all of these things, but our job is to try to learn our best to become resilient. And there are many ways to do it. Talking about how we feel, expressing ourselves fully, learning boundaries, understanding what we truly value, learning how to take care of our well-being, understanding that real power, real leadership comes from that vulnerability, that ability to operate and be yourself. I mean, the idea of coming and doing something like this for me, for Alan, say 10 years ago, would have been utterly terrifying. But over the last decade, I've done so much work on myself, and and I'm not the finished product either, lots more to work on, but like that work essentially has been for other purposes, the other things that I was navigating in life, but somehow it showed up in my career, and it's helped me enormously in terms of just how I show up for the people around me, and show up best for myself as well.
I think it's really key what you've just said there around that personal development and personal reflection piece, and how you putting yourself first in that has been incredible for yourself personally and professionally by the sound of it. And I think we could take a lot of inspiration from that, because you are absolutely right. You said just then, as people leaders, we often have the battle scars. People think that we are the decision makers in terms of we're the ones going to do this restructure or ways of working change. It's not us. We're not the decision makers. It is the organization. But HR now, we're falling into more of a change agent and advocates of change. And I think with anyone listening, they will feel that. I think we still feel these battle scars that we have because employees lean on us, line managers lean on us, and then also the business lean on us. Like, how are we going to manage this change? They see it one dimensional, but it's also for us to go, okay, we have this period of change, but we've also got this transition, and it's a real long momentum, and here are all the things that we need to think about. But the biggest piece that you just said there, and I really definitely feel this myself is that personal piece. As I mentioned earlier, I went through an acquisition. I was an employee during that point. Then afterwards, I've done the acquisition of around 600 employees. With every single one of those 600, I changed the approach because I never wanted them to feel how I felt during the process when I went through it as an individual. And that has been the biggest learning for me during that process. And I actually got so much better of understanding how to ask better questions for how people manage change, because everybody manages it so differently. Things like body language, noticing who was quiet, noticing who were my early advocates of change, and really tapping into that. I found that the most beneficial for me as a professional. I don't know if you found that during your career, getting those early adopters, if you found that helpful.
Yeah, of course. I think we all need that, right? We all need people that are on side, whether it's running a particular one-off project or whether it's just managing the day-to-day burden of running a business. We need allies in our corner, especially in the people team. You know, it can be a lonely job, especially if you're maybe listening and you're a standalone people professional. One of the hardest things you can do to be a standalone people head of people. But also, you know, where there are complex dynamics in organizations. I've been in, you know, companies that are global in nature. And so you've got cultural differences and different ways of approaching and thinking about what work actually means. And it's like for us in this new coming era of AI, which is going to, I think, remove a lot of the cognitive burden that we have traditionally had to do in the use of the analytical mind. I truly believe that the most exceptional people professionals will be the one that can get in tune most with their own energy. We're moving away. There was someone talked about this, and for the love of me, I can't remember who it was. We're moving away from mindset now, and we're moving to the heart set.
Ooh, I've not heard of
Yeah.
that.
So there's a lot that people don't recognize or know about, like the heart. People believe it's just a valve that pumps blood around your body. It's so much more than that. The heart has its own brain to some degree, right? Has neurites inside it. And it allows for communication to go back to the brain. And when people say, like, when somebody's in a good vibe, they just make you feel better. This is like when you're getting into like a flow state. You're creating coherence between the mind or the brain and the heart. And that state of coherence is shown that when you are in a state of coherence, which is when people might say, I'm grounded, I'm feeling relaxed, I'm feeling in a good state of flow. They're in like a state of coherence. But when you're in coherence, you lift others up into coherence as well. And there's an institute called the Heart Math Institute for anybody listening. By the way, this is not woo-woo. You can go and check out all of their research. They talk about the connection between the heart and the mind, and also like how where the state of flow that we're operating from and the state of consciousness impacts on the state of those around us. And we can feel that. It's what you're saying, when you're in those meetings and you're sensing the energy. Someone is like, maybe particularly quiet, somebody's very loud, somebody's very anxious. They aren't saying it, but you're sensing it. And these are these intuitive gifts that we must learn to utilize, and we will learn to utilize more, because we're no longer having to use this, because there's an entity now in ChatGPT and Claude and all these incredible tools that are at our disposal that are just like taking away the cognitive burden. So now we get a chance to know ourselves. That's exciting, but also scary, because there's a lot to walk through in order to fully connect with all of who we are.
I haven't heard anybody describe it in that way, and I'm obsessed. I love it. I've heard a lot of people say, AI is going to make us be more human, which is essentially also what you're saying there. But that, for me, was like a light bulb moment as you're talking, because you're absolutely right. We will, be able to be better humans because of it. And this is where, as HR professionals, we're often the last to everything, but we can start to be ahead with how are we going to be more proactive with something that is always guaranteed, change and transition within business, within life. How can we be better partners to the organization, which always goes back to the good old question of we're not strategic enough. And that's a way that we can really excel and grow as professionals rather than just staying in that compliance lane. So, we were talking earlier around your 3 principles, and I would love if we could dig into those a little bit and the 3 principles for transition for us both professionally and personally.
Yeah. I think the first principle that comes to mind is, I suppose, if we take that transitional journey from ending, middle, and new beginning, I'd say the first one is definitely acceptance. Why is acceptance important? Well, we know that in any change environment, there is, like I mentioned, it's going to be emotionally charged, and it's going to also trigger things within us, whether we are trying to manage things are not going as well as they possibly could be, or we are putting certain judgments on ourselves. Acceptance is like a doorway. It allows us to come to peace. And that is often the thing that helps all of us, whether it's in your personal life. For example, you go through a difficult relationship breakup. It's usually when you come to acceptance with what has happened, whatever has happened, whether it's in a relationship in your personal life, whether it's in an organizational context, the quicker we come to acceptance, the faster we come to peace. And it's from that state of awareness that we can then start to make the right choices. It's often very difficult to make the right choices for yourself, whether it's a career choice, whether it's a where do I live choice, whether it's a who do I select as a life partner choice. It's very difficult when we're clogged up with these emotionally charged energies like anger, frustration, which are absolutely all acceptable. That's one of the things that often I've seen in the past, from HR professionals is like, employees or managers get angry or emotional and upset. And it's like, we want to close that down because it makes us feel uncomfortable. But our capacity as leaders must be the amount that we can hold for another human being. That's what leadership actually is. It's like, how much truth can you offer me right now in this moment? And how much can I contain that before it triggers something inside of me? And if it does trigger something inside of me, that I have the awareness to know how I am responding and reacting to that, because this tells you everything you need to know. Your body is like a smoke alarm. So when stuff's coming in, for example, you might not be afraid of spiders and one runs across the floor and you're completely fine. Doesn't set off your alarm. It does for me though. So maybe I'm afraid of spiders, right? So it's something that's really important. It's like, know thyself. But acceptance is an amazing way of beginning the journey of like opening the door to understanding your own emotional capacity to hold another human being. And likewise for anybody else listening or watching, that is the beginning of how you manage change effectively. Because if it's happening right now, it's happening. To deny the reality of what's actually present right now is insanity.
But it's also how you respond to that.
Yeah, of course.
So if that's happening and it's beyond your control, let's position this in a work context. There is a restructure going on. The business has made that decision. That's beyond your control. You've got 1 or 2 ways that you can go about it. But I think I love that you've just mentioned how we've got to ask ourselves, how are we going to respond? Because that is the piece that we can control.
Yeah, 100%. I think once you step through with acceptance, probably something that I speak a lot about at On Security and the current head of people role that I'm doing is, and it's been hard learned to be honest, is transparency. And because I talk about a lot of the work that I'll do it with compassion, but I'll do it directly. I can hold another human being in the process, but I can also be the person that guides them through something really difficult like redundancy, for example, or disciplinaries or other tough decisions that impact on people's emotions. Like, I can do both of those things, but I can only do it if I commit myself to being radically transparent as much as possible, because with transparency, of course, the risk is sometimes we overshare or we share too early. But I think like where we always can, especially during times of change, like take that risk of communicating. You don't hire people, and most people who are listening, you've hired an enormous amount of highly intelligent people, right, who all are not just, incredibly cognitively intelligent, but intuitively they sense when things are in a good place and they sense when things are off. They sense when they're not getting the whole story. Why offer an opportunity to damage your the goodwill and reciprocity you've got with your employees. Why damage the engagement you get from your employees when the thing that can solve that is truth? Truth. That is ultimately at the very heart of it. And I have grappled with this for a lot of my career. I've got it wrong so many times about what I thought people were capable of handling. But in the end, if you want to create like a high performing team, if you genuinely want to build a high performing culture, there has to be truth. And truth might feel difficult, but the more that it's offered up, and if it's offered from the right energy, that's the most important thing. For example, I had a line manager in my previous organisation. She hired me for the job, and she knew all of my blind spots. She was unbelievable. She was so talented. But one of the things she done, she pushed me so hard. But I never felt discomfort with that because whilst yet sometimes it stung a little, but I always knew that she was coming from, like, the way I would describe it, a place of love, a place of like, I care about your development and I want you to get better. So I am going to offer you this feedback. Her name is Beth Nevins. She's just one of the most phenomenal people leaders, and somebody who had this grasp of like the ability to deliver truth at the right moments, deliver transparent feedback. And that is something that, as we all navigate, whether it's an individual journey of change or a collective journey of change, if we can offer that to others and ourselves, it can be radically transformative for our journey.
The thing with trust and truth as well is it can be quite hard to build, especially new relationships with a leader and coming in, but we can break it within seconds.
Yeah.
And I love that also the intentionality from your leader to invest in you, but also to tell you that truth and tell you it from a place of development and constructive criticism so that you can grow.
Yeah. The thing about it is, here's the truth of all of it. What we also need on this path, it goes alongside it. It's not my third principle, but it's something that we need. We need to learn the art of forgiveness,
Yes.
right? Nobody's going to get it right 100% of the time. Don't allow your own little stories to hold you back from leaning into like difficult feedback. I've worked with loads of difficult leaders. I've got one in mind in particular who was often offering up lots of hard truths, which triggered the living daylights out of me. But, in some way I realised that he was right in some ways. Like, he saw sometimes how I, would hold back and wouldn't lean in as fully as I could. And I had my own reasons for that. But, don't allow, like one little perceived negative thing, or maybe how someone didn't handle it. How can someone handle everything perfectly? They can't. They're a human being. We're stressed out. We're busy. We're maxed out. We've got pressures at home. We've got pressures in the workplace. We're trying to manage our teams. We're trying to manage ourselves, right? And so you're never going to get it all right. On some level, too many organizations, too many people are quick to like jump straight to a final judgment about somebody's abilities, capabilities, how they show up. When, you know what, sometimes we just have bad days. And what we have to do is learn the art of forgiveness. But when people can't forgive, that tells you everything you need to know about how they treat themselves. If somebody struggles to forgive others, it's a sign that they are holding a lot against themselves. And this is important to know. This is very important to know in this new coming world that's coming. It's so important that we know ourselves deeply, the wounds that we're carrying, the things that we hold against ourselves, the limiting beliefs that we have imposed, that events outside of us may have triggered, but we are still holding the energy, the pattern, and we hold it there because it's comfortable, because our nervous system, and this is important, leaders must learn this stuff now, our nervous system will hang on to a familiar hell than an unfamiliar heaven. Because we as human beings are deeply programmed, and it's very important to know this. If you're managing change, if you're managing people, if you're managing yourself, like, you have to know the deep roots of who you are as a human being, and the deeper you can go. And I know it's scary, and it doesn't happen overnight. You don't just go to like one retreat and everything all changes. It doesn't work like that. For some people it does, and that's amazing. But for others, it's a journey. And it certainly has been for me. Hard fought.
So much that you've just said there, I'm thinking of anyone who hasn't heard this perspective before, and you're absolutely right. And I'm thinking, okay, I hear you. I hear your perspective. I need to start with myself. but what are the small steps that I could do today to start to get onto that journey?
I mean, on a personal level, one of the first things that people have to learn to do is just learning how to breathe properly.
Mm-hmm.
Like genuinely, like I know we hear loads around now, Wim Hof breathing and breath work but it's true. At the very core level, it's like most of us are breathing somewhere up here, especially in our meetings. We're sitting with other leaders around us and we know it's coming to our turn and and there's scrutiny on the people projects and the budget and all of that. And we're breathing up here somewhere like, like what am I
Feels
going to say?
tight.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like when we're calm, there's like a technique. It's actually called brain and heart coherence breathing. It's like 5 breaths through the nose, 5 breaths out of the nose, just really gentle. It could be done at your desk. You could do it for 2 minutes, 3 minutes. If you can do it for 5, amazing. There's actually little guides in Spotify or on YouTube you can use. Like I'm starting there. There's so much more that you could do, but like just literally like tuning into your body, like what's going on in here? What is this thing here telling you about like what's going on in the room? Because right now, for example, I feel very relaxed. So, I sense like my heart rate's like quite low and because I'm connected to myself, I can feel like my inner body, if you could call it that. But sometimes I've not been, sometimes I'm here, I'm just locked in completely here thinking, what am I going to say? How do I present this difficult topic to these other leaders or to these employees? And I'm a mess. I'm not communicating from my heart and people feel that instantaneously. And that disrupts our credibility. And that's one of the most important things. So that's just the beginning of it, taking care of yourself first. We all are desperate to get the oxygen masks on everybody else when the plane's crashing. But this is avoidance. This is what most people don't recognize, is that our like desire to constantly be on the go, to be helping others, to be fixing everything is in some way an avoidance of what it is that we have to face within ourselves, this moment to moment awareness. That's the thing that we have to face because look, I've done loads of stuff, like loads of like crazy stuff to gratify myself, or I've done loads of stuff to try and heal myself. I've done plant medicines, breath work, meditation, therapy, coaching, exercise, like, and it all has a place, right? But one way or the other, you will keep meeting yourself over and over again. That tricky like pattern you have, that difficult trigger that pops up from time to time, it will keep happening. But it's more about how you respond to it. Whereas before, when we're unconscious, we react to these things. We react to the person that questions us or challenges us or doesn't validate us. Whereas we start to learn, oh wait, like I'm going into that energy and I have a choice now. A choice whether to react in the old way or to step into a new energy. And that's like the new beginning. That's what it is. The new beginning is the representation of a new energy because you've let go of the old energy. The old energy is the fear and the anger and the frustrations. And all of the middle part is the keep letting go of the fear of who am I without all of that? Who am I without that job now? Who am I now that people know that I've been made redundant? And it's like you will let go of all of that and then step into a new energy. And the new energy can be, well, actually, do you know what? I realized that I lost everything in life and I'm still here. And actually I've got so much wisdom and it's like everything's like a deviation onto a higher path, but only if we're willing to see it that way. If we're willing to go through the pain to get there, right? You're a business leader, you know this. So it's like embodying that new energy, and that new energy is the final principle that I would talk about, which is purpose. When you're there, it's like you begin to embody that new energy. This is an amazing time for creativity. It's an amazing time for forming new connections. And it's an amazing time for getting really clear on what is your purpose, whether it's in a job, whether it's in a team, whether it's a way of working. How is that purpose contributing to the bigger picture in an organization, or how is it contributing to the bigger picture of your life? So these are like this is this like almost journey that you make through any change, and these transitions are going on, multiple transitions possibly going on from a career perspective, life perspective, relationships, family, friends. These are all happening all of the time, and we're always being asked to choose a higher way. We just have to see it that way.
I got really inspired listening to you. And as you're talking through your journey, I really related when you were talking around putting the oxygen mask on for everyone else. I'm a fixer. If someone needs help with something, you can always count on me. I'll always put my hand up. During my early career, and even now, I'm a sponge. I will say yes, I will do everything that I can to help others. And when you were talking about that piece, it also made me think that I need to do a reflection piece of how I handle change and transition, because I've always been a fixer, but I've not really got to the root of why I do that. So then it just keeps coming up, just keeps resurfacing, and I keep revisiting it. But I also think that would make me a better professional. I don't have all the answers. And I am so honest and really transparent about that. But I will figure it out. But I also think for me to be a better professional, there is that personal piece.
Yeah.
So I unfortunately only have one last question for you.
Go on.
And given everything that we've spoken about, let's reflect back to your early career. And this is a question to your younger self. So if you look back on your early career, what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self?
Oh, I was not expecting you to ask me that. I think it would just genuinely be not to be so hard on yourself. A lot of my journey has been permeated by perfectionism, by always believing that love existed outside of myself, and that achievement was the vehicle that I used to get love, like a lot of us have learned. And that through achieving, whether it was in my younger days as a wee boy, like playing football and wanting my dad to validate me and have other adults tell me how good I was, whether it was in university, I wanted the best grades, so the lecturers would be like, you're the best, all the way through to my early career of where it was like, I'm doing everything perfectly. There's nothing's wrong here. The process is perfect. Every single time is like everything I'm doing is always like 100% right. But what that done was it created so much resistance to fear, so much resistance to like learning and growing, because there is no learning and growing without failure or what we perceive as failure, but it's actually just learning. And along the way, I was so hard on myself. I'd get so emotional, so angry. I'd get so down on myself because I believe, why am I not perfect? Why am I not as good as them? It would lead to comparison, and it would lead to me like, getting unhappy very quickly. And in the end, it was all coming from me. It was all my own shit getting in the way. And I think like looking back on that and looking at the journey that I've made, over the last decade in particular, but particularly over the last couple of years, life has thrown a lot of challenges my way, a lot of it self-generated, which I take full responsibility for, because this is part of how we grow. It's like leaning in, like seeing the role we're playing in our own suffering, seeing how our patterns are affecting us and other people around us, whether it's our team, our colleagues, our partner, our kids. And it's like being able to lean in and do the hard thing of going, do you know what? Like, I have to figure out another way here. I have to show up differently. Otherwise, I'm going to keep perpetuating the same cycles. I'm going to keep damaging the goodwill and reciprocity of the people around me. I'm going to lose the dressing room in the workplace. So I think that's the thing that I'd say most is like just giving myself a break, not being so hard on myself, giving myself some space to just be human.
Honestly, thank you so much for the honesty and transparency throughout the entire conversation. I've been sat here and I feel very inspired. So I know a lot of people listening will feel exactly the same. And this is a conversation that us as people leaders and people professionals, I think potentially we're a little bit scared to have. But by starting with ourselves, it actually will make us better leaders. And I'm so thankful for all the tips that you shared. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Like this episode? Click here for more HR talk. And if you're just catching up, check out our previous episodes right here.